In the autumn of 1907, a prospector named Elias Thornbury worked his way along the base of a sandstone bench in the Book Cliffs east of Helper, Utah, tracing a coal outcrop that had never been marked on any territorial survey. He worked alone, carrying a pick, a hand auger, and a canvas sample bag, under contract to a coal operator who wanted to know whether the seam running east from the Castle Gate district was thick enough and clean enough to justify the cost of filing a formal claim with the General Land Office. The face he found that October morning was fresh. A recent rockfall had exposed a clean vertical cut of bituminous coal, black and unbroken, sealed inside strata that geologists would later place in the Blackhawk Formation, laid down somewhere close to 80 million years before Thornbury ever climbed into that canyon. He struck the face with his pick, the way any prospector tested a seam for grade, and a slab the size of a dinner plate broke free along a natural cleavage line. Inside it, sealed on every side by coal that no drill, no claim marker, and no human hand had ever reached, was a forged iron nail. The nail was square in cross-section, 4 inches long, its head flattened by hand, with the faint, irregular hammer marks of a blacksmith's anvil rather than the perfect uniformity of a machine die. Thornbury did not think much of it. He assumed some earlier prospector had lost a tool nearby, and that the nail had washed into a crack in the rock. He pocketed it, finished his survey, and rode back to Helper to file his report. It was weeks later, when the company's consulting geologist split the surrounding coal for a mineral assay, that anyone noticed the nail was not sitting in a crack at all. It was fixed inside the coal itself, coal on every face of it, with no fracture line running to the surface that could explain how it got there. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. What Thornbury had cut into was not an ordinary outcrop. The Book Cliffs coal belongs to a formation geologists know today as the Blackhawk Formation, a band of coal-bearing sandstone and shale laid down along the shoreline of an inland sea that once split North America in two. The coal itself began as peat, compressed and slowly carbonized under successive layers of sediment, across a span of geologic time, measured in tens of millions of years, not centuries. A modern core sample taken from the same bench in 1961 and later re-examined with improved dating methods in the 1990s placed the coal at 76 to 80 million years old, consistent across every seam tested along that stretch of the cliffs. There is no known process by which a hand-forged nail, an object requiring iron ore, a furnace, and a smith's hammer could form inside coal laid down that long before human beings existed on any continent. And there is no known mining claim, formal or informal, filed for that particular section of the Book Cliffs before Thornbury's survey in 1907. The Land Office records for Carbon County, digitized and searchable today, show the earliest patent request for that section dated 1911, 4 years after the nail was found, and 3 years after the company abandoned its interest in the site entirely. The age of the Blackhawk Formation is not established by a single method or a single sample. Geologists correlate it using marine fossils found in the shale layers above and below the coal, ammonites, and foraminifera, whose species ranges are tightly constrained by decades of comparison against other Cretaceous sites across the western interior. Those same marker fossils appear in the layers immediately surrounding the seam Thornbury cut into, consistent with every other exposure tested along the Book Cliffs from Helper east to the Colorado border. A dating error confined to one small pocket of one bench, isolated from an otherwise uniform and independently corroborated stratigraphic sequence, would itself be a remarkable finding, and no geologist who has examined the site has proposed one. The coal is what the coal everywhere around it says it is. Carbon County in 1907 was already a working coal district, its camps at Castle Gate, Kenilworth and Sunnyside supplying rail lines that ran coal out through Helper toward the Wasatch Front. Prospectors like Thornbury were sent out ahead of the established camps almost every season, Checking outcrops the main operators had not yet bothered to survey, because a seam thick enough and a haul short enough could turn an unclaimed stretch of cliff into a working mine within a year. The work was routine. Company records from the period show dozens of similar test surveys conducted along the book cliffs in that decade alone, most of them ending the same way Thornbury's did, with a sample bag, a short report, and no claim filed. What made his report unusual was not the seam. It was what came out of it. The company geologist who examined the coal, a Colorado School of Mines graduate named Walter Priddy, described the nail in a private letter to a colleague as sitting in coal that showed, in his words, no sign of intrusion, fracture, or later insertion of any kind. He requested that the company preserve both halves of the slab for further study. The company's mine superintendent, a man more concerned with tonnage than with anomalies, filed the letter and the specimen in the company office at Castle Gate, and moved on to more immediate business. Priddy left the company's employ the following spring. His subsequent published work, 3 papers over the next decade, concerned itself entirely with sandstone porosity and had nothing further to say about the Book Cliffs coal or the object found inside it. Colleagues who corresponded with him in later years noted, almost in passing, that he had grown reluctant to discuss his early fieldwork in Carbon County at all. Priddy was not the only person to examine the specimen that year. At his request, the company sent a second sample, the smaller of the 2 halves, to a mineralogist at the University of Utah for an independent opinion. That mineralogist's reply, also preserved in the company's Castle Gate correspondence file, agreed with Priddy's description of the coal as unbroken and continuous around the nail, though he stopped short of offering any explanation for how the object had come to be there. He suggested, in a line Priddy underlined in his own copy of the letter, that the matter was better suited to a geologist studying coal formation than to a mineralogist studying rock composition, and that he had no further comment to make. No such geologist appears to have taken up the question. The correspondence ends there. The specimen itself survived the closure of the Castle Gate mine office in the 1920s, passed into private hands through an estate sale, and today sits in a private mineral collection in Price, Utah, catalogued with a hand-lettered tag that still carries Priddy's original field notation. It has been examined twice by independent geologists in the past 30 years, in 1994 and again in 2011, and both examinations confirmed what the original 1907 assay found. The coal surrounding the nail shows no cut marks, no drilling, no seam of later material, and no evidence that the nail was pressed or hammered into the coal after the coal itself had formed. The object is inside the rock the same way a fossil is inside the rock, fully enclosed, fully continuous, with the surrounding material, with nothing to suggest it arrived there by any means other than having been there when the coal itself finished forming. The mine inspector's office for the state of Utah kept a running log of coal seam surveys conducted across Carbon County in this period, a requirement under the state's 1906 mining code. The log for the Book Cliff survey, covering Thornbury's find, shows entries for the first week of October, then a gap. The next entry, in a different clerk's handwriting, is dated 3 days later and makes no reference to the nail at all, despite Priddy's letter having already reached the state office by then, according to the postal date stamped on the surviving copy. 3 days unaccounted for, in a log that was otherwise kept without interruption for the better part of a decade. What happened during that gap? Whether a decision was made, a specimen was examined, or the matter was simply set aside amid the ordinary business of a mine inspector's office, the surviving record does not say. The blank itself is what remains. The Utah State Archives hold the surrounding pages of that same log, and they show nothing unusual before or after the gap. Surveys are logged in order, dated, initialed, cross-referenced against claim filings. The 3 missing days sit alone in an otherwise continuous decade of record-keeping, bounded on either side by entries in the same clerk's careful hand. Company payroll records for the same week, also preserved, show no absence, no illness, no reassignment that would explain why the State Office's own log falls silent at precisely the moment Priddy's letter should have arrived. A missing week might be an accident of paperwork. 3 days, bracketed on both sides by an unbroken pattern, is harder to read as anything but a choice. This is not the only time a forged iron object has been reported sealed inside coal that predates the existence of ironworking by tens of millions of years. In 1891, a woman named Mrs. S. W. Culp of Morrisonville, Illinois, broke open a lump of coal delivered to her home for the kitchen stove and found a small iron pot embedded inside it, reported at the time in the local paper and picked up shortly after by regional press. The coal had come from a mine near Springfield, drawn from strata dated by later survey to the Pennsylvanian period, roughly 300 million years old. No explanation was ever offered for how a cast object could sit inside coal that old, and the pot itself was displayed locally for years before it disappeared from public record sometime in the early 20th century. 45 years later, and 800 miles to the southwest, a rancher named Max Hahn was walking along Red Creek near London, Texas, when he and his wife found a rock concretion with a wooden handle protruding from one end. Splitting it open revealed a forged iron hammerhead fused into the stone, the wood partially carbonized, the iron itself showing a composition and forging technique consistent with 19th century blacksmith work. The rock encasing it has been dated by conventional geology to the Ordovician period, over 400 million years old, though the more widely accepted explanation among mainstream geologists is that the hammer became encased far more recently, through rapid mineral deposition in groundwater, rich in dissolved limestone, a process that can encase modern objects in what looks like ancient rock within a matter of decades rather than eons. The Morrisonville account has never been independently verified beyond the newspaper report itself. The pot disappeared from public display sometime after 1912, and no institution holds it today, which is precisely the detail skeptics point to when they set the case aside. The Culp family's own descendants, interviewed decades later by regional historians, maintained that the object existed and that their grandmother had shown it to visitors for years, but a family memory is not a laboratory record, and the case has remained a piece of folklore that most geologists decline to engage with at all. The London hammer fared differently. It has been in continuous, documented custody since the day Max Hahn's wife picked it up, first in the Hahn family's possession, then donated in 1983 to a private museum in Glen Rose, Texas, where it remains on display and available for examination by anyone who requests it. Its custody chain is not in dispute. What remains in dispute is only its age, and their mainstream geology and the museum that houses it have never agreed. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. That same rapid encasement explanation has been offered for the Morrisonville pot, and more recently for the Thornbury nail. Coal, unlike the limestone concretion at Red Creek, does not typically form through rapid mineral deposition around a foreign object. It forms through slow burial and compaction of plant material over vast stretches of time, a process that geologists broadly agree does not lend itself to the kind of accidental encasement that can explain the Texas hammer. That distinction is what separates the Utah nail from its two closest parallels rather than uniting them. The Bookcliff specimen sits inside true coal, chemically and structurally continuous with the surrounding seam, examined under conditions that ruled out the explanations available for a limestone nodule beside a creek bed. What the three cases share is not a single explanation. What they share is the same basic shape of the problem, a manufactured object, unmistakably the product of human hands and human metallurgy, found fully enclosed inside geological material that the accepted timeline says predates those hands by an interval too large to reconcile with ordinary chance. The Carbon County Land Office records carry one more detail worth setting down plainly. The section where Thornbury found the nail was never claimed by the company that sent him there. Internal correspondence preserved in the company's surviving records shows the operator lost interest in the site within a year, citing seam thickness that did not justify the cost of a rail spur, and turned its attention to more accessible coal closer to Castle Gate. No claim was filed on that section until 1911, when a different, unrelated operator staked it, for reasons that had nothing to do with Thornbury's find. That operator's own survey notes, also preserved in the county archive, make no mention of the nail, Priddy's letter, or the earlier assay at all. Whether that silence reflects ignorance of the earlier find or a deliberate decision not to record it, the surviving paper trail does not resolve. What it shows clearly is a seam that sat undisturbed, unclaimed, and largely forgotten for 4 years after an object was pulled from inside it, that, by every geological measure available at the time or since, should not have been there at all. What the Thornbury nail requires, if the coal dating is accepted at face value and the assay conditions are taken as accurately reported, is one of two conclusions. Either the standard chronology for the Blackhawk Formation is wrong for that specific pocket of coal, an explanation no subsequent survey of the surrounding seam has supported, since every later sample taken from the same bench has returned dates consistent with the original assay, or a forged iron object, unmistakably the product of a human forge and a human hand, came to rest inside material that had already finished forming tens of millions of years before iron was ever smelted by anyone, anywhere, on this or on any other continent. Neither explanation sits comfortably within the record as it currently exists. The coal has not been re-examined by any major research institution since 2011. The specimen remains in private hands. The state mine inspector's original log, gap and all, is preserved at the Utah State Archives in Salt Lake City, available to any researcher who requests it, though few ever have. A handful of independent researchers have proposed reopening the Bookcliffs assay with modern isotopic methods, techniques that did not exist in 1994 or even in 2011, and that could, in principle, date the coal immediately surrounding the nail with far greater precision than either earlier examination achieved. No funding has been secured for that work. The private collector who holds the specimen has, according to 2 researchers who have corresponded with the family, expressed willingness to allow testing, provided the object itself is not damaged in the process. What has stalled the work is not access. It is the absence of any institution willing to spend the money and attach its name to a result that, however it comes out, will not fit comfortably into an existing paper. Thornbury himself stayed in the coal business for another decade, appearing in company payroll ledgers as a contract surveyor for outfits working the Bookcliffs and the Wasatch Plateau through 1918. He never filed a claim of his own, on that section or any other, and he never wrote or spoke publicly about the nail beyond the report he filed the week he found it. A brief mention in a 1931 obituary in the Sun Advocate, the Price newspaper, notes only that he had once worked as a coal prospector in the county's early years and had later taken up ranching near Wellington. It says nothing about the nail. Whether he simply moved on, the way most men who spend their lives testing rock for a living eventually do, or chose deliberately not to keep talking about a find that never made him any money and never got him a straight answer, the obituary does not say either. The nail itself has never left Price, Utah. It sits in the same collection it entered nearly a century ago, still bearing Priddy's original tag in his own hand, still embedded in the 2 halves of the slab Thornbury split open on a cold October morning in 1907. The coal around it has never been fully removed. Whoever owns it now has chosen, so far, to leave the object exactly as Priddy first documented it, half in rock, half exposed, neither fully freed from the coal nor fully explained by it. Thornbury never claimed the section where he found it, and no one else claimed it for 4 years afterward. The seam sat quiet in the cliffs above Helper the entire time, holding the same forged nail it had apparently been holding since long before there was a Utah, a territory, a continent shaped the way this one is shaped today, or a single human hand capable of striking iron into a point. If the dating holds, and so far every attempt to challenge it has failed, then somewhere in that coal is a question the record has never closed. Not how the nail was lost, how it came to be there before anyone existed who could have lost it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.